Good morning. Welcome to getting first things done first, right? Get something made every day. Probably work down here. Let's move that up a little bit. Got myself some line decor today. Thought, do a couple pages of this. Could be a good idea for me. So. Alright, scoot that over. Perfect. Zoom in on that area. There we go. Get it up and out of the way, right? Alright, not working here. Alright. Nice and chilly out there this morning too. It's funny, it's when I'm out there walking my dog and he suddenly starts to get a little cold. He's like, oh, we should go home. And he's like, nope, we gotta stop and smell this thing before we go home. But yeah, so we're doing copy from Lion Decker. I've been doing that this week mostly. That's what's up here and over on the left. One up in the upper corner. Giving the New Year's baby a little kiss. Do I have a preference in traditional media? I think I like a lot of different things, so that's a hard question. It kind of depends on what it's for. That's more of an issue for me. Traditionally, I have not liked acrylic painting, but I've been thinking about experimenting with that because I do a lot of different things. So I like acrylic, I like gouache, I like oil, I like watercolor, pencil, color pencil, charcoal, Conte ink, nibs and markers, and I like a lot of things. So that's been a so yeah. So I don't really have like a favorite. I do like oil painting a lot, but I haven't done that as much lately. Um, I have a lot of divergent interests, and so I like doing 3D stuff. I'm kind of falling out of love with digital painting and drawing. I can do it still just fine, but I am kind of less interested in that than I have been in the past. Um, yeah, I love the smell of oil paint. Um, so yeah, but I've done a lot of oil painting over the years. Um, Actually, just scanning in some of my gouache landscapes yesterday. I have from watercolor stuff. I've never done it from oil. Oil will be in a different kind of can, right? I've done it once with ink water specifically, but well, it's actually not. No, I didn't drink from it. I dipped my brush in it, so that was the mistake. I've never actually drunk it because obviously it'll be like my ink water is in a big. It's an old canister for dog treats for my dog, so it'd be hard to pick it up by accident. So let's see, dog's getting up. Yeah, probably I'll get some water. But yeah, so yeah, that's yeah, but I haven't done a lot of like I've done some illustration and stuff with oil painting. It's more actually painting like landscape painting or painting people and still lifes and that kind of thing. I've done a little bit kind of illustration wise with oil painting for demos for students in the past. It's around here somewhere, which I need to show them to different artist friend of mine. Um, I was getting in some of my gouache landscapes last night for a couple of the oil ones for some applications to some plein air events, some landscape painting events. Yeah, I have. I have actually. So yeah, I used to work. Well, I should get back to it actually, but um, I worked with in the studio. I worked with Disney Interactive on the Toy Story 3 game as an environment concept artist mostly. I did a little bit of character stuff and there, some robots and things, but mostly environments. And then I've worked with like EA and Riot and those types of studios, along with a lot of smaller indie projects. So, but in terms of portfolio, it depends on what you want to do, right? And I think the way portfolios are presented today is a little bit different than when I was getting started a long time ago. In that, you know, there seems to be kind of a standardized way of presenting things where, you know, you have like a character sheet that's got, you know, an assortment of information on it. Something I've kind of come to a realization I need to help my students with more. It's probably been around a while. I just you know, it's never really factored into what I was doing. But so that's often helpful. But I think, yeah, a lot of what it's really, I think, you really want in a concept portfolio is you want whatever concepts you have to tell some kind of story with what the things are. So it's not just a cool drawing of something like a vehicle or a person or a location, but ultimately there's some kind of story embedded in that design that tells you about that character or vehicle or location or piece of equipment, that by looking at it, you know, they get a sense of who they are and what they do or how it functions, what its purpose is. You know, is it for something good? Is it for something bad? Is it something in between or neither? I think that's ultimately the attitude you want to have with the work, is that you should be able to indicate, you know, its story just from looking at it. And I think if you look at some of like the best concept artists out there, they're able to kind of inculcate that into their work. That you can look at what they're working on and say, oh, this is a great story. I'm really interested in this character. I want to know more because, you know, you've told me an interesting story in a visual way, you know, without having to kind of over explain what's going on with them. So I think that's always kind of the thing to aim for, is that kind of storytelling. Ultimately. Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, you should apply to studios that line up with your work rather than trying to match other people's work. The best place to be, I think, as a concept artist is to have people hire you because of what you do and how what you do benefits them. Because that's, you know, another type of thinking that I'm trying to, you know, help my students with, is that they need to see not how the studio benefits them, but how they can benefit the studio. And so certain studios, there's like a house style, right? So you think of Blizzard, and there's like, a house style. Or Disney is very, very particular about style. Um, but there's other studios where like the whole studio is built around the artists that they hire, right? So that they bring you in because you have a unique vision. That's the optimal place to get. Is that they come to you for you. So that means you specifically have very particular value to them, rather than just being a cog in the machine. I think a lot of see it a lot today, but a lot of artists kind of see themselves as just kind of fitting in as part of a piece of a machine, rather than being in charge of that machine. And that kind of being just a little a cog in the machine like that, that gives like great justification for the executive class of a studio to just shift over to AI, because like what value do you bring, right? Like what do you matter? They can just get some machine to emulate it or develop things in their house style. Like why even care about what you do? And they tend to think, non-creatives tend to think that their ideas are better anyway, so but unique style doesn't necessarily mean like something quirky or weird. It just means that there's you have a way of expressing things that stands out apart from others. So you can work realistically or stylistically or more abstractly or with a lot more detail or less or distortions of different kinds. That can mean 100 different things depending on what your circumstances are, or 1,000 or 1,000,000 different things. But that's the ultimate spot to be. Is to have people come to you for you, and that can take a while to figure out. But it's like they look at their project. They're like we could use Craig Mullen's voice in here. We could use Darren Bartley's voice, or whoever. Or if you look at someone like Nico Marley, he all of the DreamWorks projects are built on his style, and the How to Train Your Dragon and Kung Fu Panda movies, they're all built from his simple pencil drawings. And he doesn't even paint them up digitally. He just has his drawings that he does, as far as I know, as far as we've seen published anyway. And he generates for them billion-dollar ideas. He's been with them for a very, very long time. He started off, I think, at Pixar, because I've seen some of his stuff in the Monsters, Inc. art book. But yeah, so that's generally what I think. I think again, I think a lot of artists, they kind of act out of fear, and they just want to kind of hide in their little hidey hole, and not present themselves in a way that makes them truly valuable to a project. Another thing I think is helpful just with concept art in general is to remember that you're creating reference for production artists to use. And so, the better you are at explaining things visually in your work, the easier time a production artist will have using your work, and that'll make you more valuable. I remember that I wasn't with them very long, as a full-time employee, but with Disney Interactive, the comments I got on my work from the production side was, oh yeah, we know exactly how to make his scenes because he really, really shows off the textures and the lighting and the surfaces and all of that in the painting, so they don't have to guess. They know exactly what to do with it. That doesn't always mean it's the most creative or anything like that, but it's just that the way that I was able to draw and paint and illustrate the scenes, that it made it really easy for them to do their jobs. That they understood how to make and put together materials and all of that stuff that they need to do, that they need to focus on. And I don't have to, they're not left guessing, whether this is made out of rock or sand or stone or, trees or metal or whatever. Alright, do we have enough stuff on here to continue? So that's generally what I think. If you can be the kind of artist that you've inculcated a lot of depth into your life, and then brought that into your work. You have a lot of life experience, and that shows up in your work. It'll give you a distinctive voice that others will want to bring into their projects. And you're not going to just be another cookie cutter concept artist. And that's an extra kind of work. And I think a lot of that's chasing down the things that you respond to. So some people like things differently than I do, which is shocking. Right? Everyone should like everything just like the way I do. But I get a lot of that is derived from exploration for like doing copies. Like everybody loves Leyendecker. He's been a popular illustrator because he's got this very distinctive voice. He and his brother developed for their illustrations, and he's got a way of gesturing and shape language, and it comes from his background of study. So he studied at the French Academy with Bouguereau, and he's kind of a famous or infamous 19th century painter, depending on who you talk to. And then they also worked exclusively from life, so they never used photographs. So that's why you can find all these studies that he's put together, and you can find all those. Well, not all of them probably, but a lot of them you can find online. And see how he did that. But again, it gave him a very particular kind of voice because he was chasing the things that interested him, even though he's just doing advertisements. How long did it take to put myself out there? Well, I am a delusional and egocentric person. So as a student, I was doing some stuff. So I did some projects, at the university. So I was working on campus as an artist at the, what was it called? The Center for something or other. But it was like an online course building site on campus. It didn't pay all that much, but I got to work on a lot of illustrations doing that. And then I did some stuff with the campus magazines, of course. Did a bunch of illustrations for them at some point. It was like student run stuff. But and then as I put myself out on like forums, because those were kind of new back then, so there was a site called like epilogue.net, which is like an early curated gallery site. So I put myself on there, and I got into their annual for that they did. They were only around a few years before I think DeviantArt came out, and they kind of faded away. But I did that, so I kind of put myself out into that, and then I picked up from I think it was a Warhammer, I think it is, some cards for them. those didn't really pay that well. In fact, they came back a couple of years afterward and tried to get me to do some more, and I was like, it just doesn't pay very well. Can you pay more? And they're like, no, we can't afford it. I'm like, all right, well, I can't really afford to work for less than minimum wage to do your cards. But I did a handful of cards for them pretty early on, and then I also put myself into some art annuals as I was leaving school. I was in Spectrum. I was in one that was called D'Artiste, which is like an instructional one, but they also kind of invited artists to be on there that were on the different forums like CG Talk and all that. So I got some of my work into that. And then the other one was, what was it called? It's behind me, the Expose. So like in 1 year I was in like these 3 different annuals. And then while I was a student too, working on my senior project, I picked up doing backgrounds for student animation that won some Emmys called Lion and the Mouse. Some student Emmys, that is. I always forget I have that. I need to look and see what's going on. They actually had to bring me back like a year later. Speaking of style, even though I'd already graduated, to finish the backgrounds for the project, because they just couldn't find anybody that could emulate the style I was working in at the time for that project. And then the project like that and my portfolio kind of led me to working with a local illustration studio right after, started teaching, so I was asked to start teaching pretty early. And right after I graduated, I was teaching figure drawing. So that's another way I let myself get put out there pretty early. And a lot of it is probably just overestimating what I could do, but others were willing to put me in the spot, so I guess it's okay. And then so I did that for a while. So I put myself out there pretty early. The kind of thing is, the sooner you can kind of put yourself out there, the sooner you can gauge, what others think of your work and what maybe you can do to improve. If you never ever expose yourself to the world, it's hard to say, what works and what doesn't work for people for what you're doing. Otherwise you're just kind of sitting in, all by yourself, wondering, what things mean. And social media can be a difficult gauge of that because, I've seen plenty of very, well-regarded, respected artists, out there, people with amazing careers whose, social media is not really all that great. So, that, it's kind of a bad way to judge certain types of things. It's good to judge, the responses for the audiences you have or you're exposed to, but it's not necessarily a good assessor of whether you're ready for, the big times or not. But that's kind of how I got started. And then I was interested in painting as well. So I was kind of teaching myself landscape painting. I worked with some local artists pretty extensively. A guy named William Whitaker. He was pretty involved with the early kind of conceptart.org community, doing their workshops and things like that. But he was local to me, so I got to work with him. He passed away a few years ago, but so and then that association with those people kind of led to some gallery stuff that I did, showing landscape paintings and all of that. So those are ways I kind of put myself out there. And putting yourself out there is often an opportunity for you to perform at a higher level too, right? So if you wait until you're perfect, that often takes a lot longer than being somewhat imperfect, putting yourself out there, um, and then seeing what the response is, because no one's going to remember a bad portfolio really. When you're applying for jobs or whatever, like most people just don't care all that much. They're not going to put someone on a list. They don't ever work with this person unless they've had a bad experience with that person. So we had a bad experience with a recent adjunct hire that led to me having to do more teaching than I should be doing. But oh well, right? Yeah, so as far as jobs through connections or portfolio, it depends, early on it was a lot of connections. So like the illustration studio I worked at and the game studio I worked with, I knew people working there, people that had graduated at the same time as me, or before me, or after me, were working there, and that was partially how those jobs were made possible. So that network was definitely very, very valuable. Having people that know you makes a big difference, because a lot of times if the studio is willing to interview you or talk to you, they look at your portfolio and they're like, yeah, this person can do the work. Like, just judging by the portfolio. What they're really trying to figure out when they interview you is whether you're a good fit. So that means, do you fit in with the culture? Do you have, similar values? Do you, are you insane? Right? That's what we're trying to figure. They're trying to figure out when they're interviewing someone. And so that's pretty universal in terms of like interviews. And so having that network in is a big deal, because it says, oh well, this person that we work with and that we like, they say this guy's really great. So what's the worst that could happen? So that's often very, very valuable. I have done the cold thing too, where I've just put myself out there, and some of the clients I've had from that, I've barely had any communication with them beyond sending them stuff, getting some feedback, and sending them the invoice. And that's about it. So but yeah, I found some good success doing that. It takes a lot. You have to talk to a lot more people, obviously, that way. Like when I did that a few years ago, as like a super extensive, long-term effort. I spent 3 or 4 hours a day just emailing people. I would send out like 30 or 40 emails in a day. So I had to find work. I was teaching, kind of temporarily replacing a what's it called, a sabbatical, a professor on sabbatical at Kutztown University, and then that ended. And they were kind of thinking it might continue, because they weren't sure if the guy was going to come back or not, because he's really old. I think he's still there, but he was doing he was on sabbatical and doing a tour for a children's book he had just completed, and all that good stuff for him. And he kind of made himself present and visible as the semester came to an end. I think it was just to indicate that I'm definitely still here. I'm not going anywhere. But so I wasn't sure if I was going to have a job or not, based on the way we're talking. Contractually, I didn't have one, so it ended when it ended. But it was a little uncertain for a little bit. So once I realized what was going to happen, and I was looking at my bank account and savings, I got to work trying to find work. And for for the game art area specifically, I spent about 3 weeks sending, literally like 40 or 50 emails a day to companies. And I went to Game Dev Map and was just kind of going through that and just emailing everybody on there that I could find, or on LinkedIn if I couldn't find the contact information there. And within about, again, 3 weeks, I had a client. And by the end of that summer, I was working at one point with like 3 different people at the same time, which was a mistake. But I worked on some interesting stuff that summer. A bunch of different game company projects, a bunch of different studios. One was like a pitch project where I was drawing a bunch of Bela Lugosi portraits. They wanted to do what's it called, a Mummy Monsters Universe game. I was back when Monsters Universe was still a possibility with who was doing that, Paramount or whoever. Let's get the brush out to fill that in. So, doing that kind of thing, got me out there pretty quick. If your portfolio is just sitting out there, like, no one's going to see it, probably, unless you're already famous. So, that's kind of one side of that coin, where, yeah, sure, your portfolio might get you work, but, if nobody knows you're out there doing stuff, if you're not putting it in front of other people, then it's very, it's unlikely to get you work. So that's one of the things with the portfolios, you got to put it out in front of people. And the way that I did it, again, was, mostly email, some messaging on LinkedIn. In fact, it got to a certain point where LinkedIn was demanding that I start paying them to start doing that. There's like a $60 a month subscription to like cold message people on there. And because if you think about like Instagram or whatever, most times you email or message somebody on a lot of these social sites, they never even see the message. Like it goes into this kind of junk folder. So a lot of people might, once in a while I'll go in there and check if there's anything worthwhile into this. It's kind of this general folder. There's usually not much there for me specifically. It's spam or whatever. But a lot of times they'll stick people who don't follow you that send you messages will show up kind of in that folder. And sometimes it's something interesting, though usually it's not, especially interesting or relevant anymore. Someone responding to a Instagram story or something like that. That's usually what's found in there. So if you've ever like messaged me and I'm not following you, that's usually where that kind of thing ends up. But and so that's similar on LinkedIn, where you can get messages from people and it goes into a separate folder, and the person receiving the message might never even see it if they don't know to look over there, or if they don't check that themselves. But if you pay, then it'll show up in their sponsored or other categories, so someone might see it that way. Because there's 2 ways I had of contacting people. One again was directly through different websites, but if you go to like Bungie, and you want to work on Marathon or Destiny or whatever, you can't simply send them an email to the art director through the website, because that information isn't there. And so, if you go on like LinkedIn, you can find art directors, and if you look up different companies, you'll see different people working there. You kind of sift through that list and can find the art directors or recruiters or creative directors, other artists, things like that. And sometimes you'll find people who are actually working for studios you want to do work with, or you feel like you would fit in with. So that can definitely be a benefit. So yeah, those are definitely some of the bigger things that I'd say are relevant. All right, let's see. I teach full time, so I am a professor, well, assistant professor, tenure track research professor at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond. So before that, I was just before coming here a couple years ago. I was at Ringling College of Art and Design in Florida. The weather there was just killing me. Just non-stop summer, never-ending humidity. I mean, I guess I started teaching pretty early on. Like I said, as I was graduating, I was asked to start teaching. Technically, I was teaching before I was graduated, but that was more of a paperwork problem than anything else. Um, but any kind of job has its own stability issues. In theory, once I have tenure here, which is possible, um, I can, I'll have less of a worry about losing my job. But there are ways of getting rid of tenured professors. The bigger one being like actually like destroying your entire department. You can do that, but it's like killing your major. Can kill your job. But um, but as far as studios go, I mean, they can be long term too. Again, just depending on the studio. But you never know, right? Like the studio, like one of the studios I worked at, Disney Interactive. I don't know, 10 years or so after I'd left there, Disney killed all of their game studios. So there's no more. They decided they weren't going to do their own games anymore. They were just going to license out the properties because reduced risk that way. So my friends who were at this studio that had been acquired by Disney, Avalanche Studios, suddenly they no longer had that sponsorship available to them. They were acquired by Warner Brothers, and they did that. This is long after I left, so I didn't work on this, obviously. But they created that Harry Potter game that people liked a year or two ago. So Avalanche Studios. That was a long time ago when I was there. But yeah, so you never know. Like they still lost a lot of people because they had to reset everything, and people they couldn't keep everybody. But so studio jobs can look permanent, but often they're not. Or we've seen a lot of layoffs in last year. A lot of that's due to overhiring during COVID. A lot of studios kind of overestimated what their futures would look like, at the executive level anyway. But so it can, a studio job can be very volatile compared to, say, a freelancer or a contract job, even sometimes, just because you anticipate the job lasting forever when in fact it may not. Economics may change, or project might die or something. Funding may disappear. So it can just depend a lot, and that's true of any profession. You just never know. Things you think are supposed to be permanent can suddenly end up not being that way at all. And it can change pretty quick. And suddenly, your whole thing is done. But yeah, one of the things I do see is a lot of people kind of want to fit in as a cog in a machine. And I just think that's a really bad idea, because if you're just a interchangeable piece of machinery in a larger production process, that by default decreases your potential value to a project, or to other people at the very least. So it's something to kind of be wary of. But it's definitely always a changing landscape. When I was a student, my junior year is when kind of the stock illustration websites came online. So illustrators could sell old illustrations or make new speculative ones, and they could put them up on these stock sites where people could license their illustrations and use them, in a legal way. And so within like a year or so, a bunch of like illustrators were making really good livings off of this stock site. And but about a year and a half later, like not even that long, suddenly that market became oversaturated with lots of artists. So suddenly, they were competing with a lot more people, which drove down the value of what they were doing. And at the same time, the internet was being suddenly a lot more useful, right? So like social media sites came online, the whole blog thing was going on. Suddenly there was a lot more media just in general. So, people that were originally licensing these images were like, magazines and that type of thing. But suddenly there were blogs and social media sites. And what that did is it basically permanently damaged, to I think a certain degree, the editorial illustration market. Because that's where most of it was going on, was editorial illustration for these stock sites. And yeah, it really, really harmed editorial illustration very, very quickly, because publishing evaporated in a big way. And so they just didn't have any more clients picking up their stuff. Spammer over there on Twitch, I appreciate that. So, you just never know. Suddenly people may lose interest in games or whatever. I saw, I didn't read very much into it, but I saw an article this morning talking about how the Bollywood boom is over. So people, were, for a couple years, were, into the Bollywood thing, right? They watch all the Bollywood movies internationally. not just in India. Um, but now that fad is passing all of a sudden, and so they're dealing with the ramifications coming from that. That it means less work or less pay for the same work for people that were used to working a different way. So you just never know. Hello over there on Kick. Welcome. Yeah, just working on sketching some Leyendecker here. So J.C. Leyendecker, who's a popular American illustrator in the first half of the 20th century. I remember right his name here. So basically finishing up here. Let's see, is that dry yet? Over here? Nope, not dry. So let's write that here though. But I will say, is the skill sets though are fairly consistent over time. So like what the editorial illustrator is really good at, or if they were good at their job, what they were good at is something called it's called conceptual illustration. So it's different than concept art, obviously, but it can be thought of as metaphorical illustration as opposed to narrative illustration. So they try to show the concept of like the article or the event, rather than explicitly telling you the story of it. And so it's a different kind of thing. A classic example of this is Brad Holland, and but there's others out there too. C.F. Payne was really great. What's your face? But usually those are attached to some kind of article. But I think that kind of metaphorical approach is still relevant today and can show up in different kinds of media. I used the thinking behind it to help some students win a Disney Imagineering internship when I was with SCAD in Hong Kong a number of years ago, and made it easier for them to put together a story and an idea that they could demonstrate symbolically rather than explicitly, because they required certain kinds of subject matter in there as part of that presentation. And so, but that thing, the principles and the skills behind certain things, whether it's narrative or visual metaphor or perspective or drawing or color, painting, edges, etc., all those things, they always stay the same. They don't really change all that much. And so if you can get a good understanding and a comfort with using these important skills, they transfer over. And so it's something actually we're working on at our university. So we have the major I'm in is called Communication Arts, and while it's got a lot of very good things going on with it, it's not nearly as focused as I think it ought to be. And so I've been helping them kind of develop a illustration track within it that's more illustration focused. Apparently the department was really supposed to be an illustration program, and it kind of got sidetracked by some things a long time ago, based off the stories I've been told by people that were there at the time. And I look at what the students want and kind of where things are at, and kind of been revamping, putting this together. So we're hoping to finally get this locked in and then started in the next year. Might take 2 years to kind of get it fully in place, but looking forward to a lot of the things that we're doing in there, and I think it'll make a big difference to the students in the long term, and I think the department. I think kind of getting that set up, because I'm trying to base it less on specific market-based classes and have it be more based off of universal principles and things that, I look at the markets over time and things that haven't really changed. We had a number of faculty who were kind of fixated on, I guess I can move that over there, the AI stuff. We even had like a big roundtable discussion in October. If you look at the social media post for that, you can see a little tiny picture of me. And I spoke up against it, said, this is obviously going to be harmful to students, and that, I think it's a tech bubble that's going to burst in the near future because it doesn't provide any actual value to people, and it makes them less competent. There's a study by Cambridge just came out about that. And so I don't think it should be integrated at all into any curriculum. I think it's a mistake to think of it as the future, because I don't think it is. Same as NFTs aren't, or some other recent tech bubbles that we've seen kind of get in the way of that. And so so that's been part of the discussion, but I look at it like, well, that's not what students are here to learn. If they want to be a prompt jockey, you can do that pretty easily on your own. I mean, the students are here because they want to have that in-person, bespoke experience where they can get, the information and the knowledge and the skill sets and the experiences that let them build their own future. They aren't here to like support my future. They don't care about me, which is fine. That should probably be the way it should be. Except they should always be bringing me gifts, right? Something, right? Yeah, so trying to revamp this program so it actually serves the students' interests, and I think I put together a proposal I think will work really well. I tried to get feedback from other professors, but not everybody has been on it as much as I have. I think there's some people, with time, people kind of stop caring because things don't go their way right away. But maybe I've just taught it enough places that I've seen what is possible, and then coming in being fresh here has helped as well. I think with kind of catching a vision that I think is good for the students. So this one's out of my head though, so I'm just filling up a little bit of time here. But yeah, so that's kind of how I look at it. So, there's definitely things that are going to change. Like the game industry is always going to be changing, right? There's always going to be something new going on with concept art. But I think the principles behind it never change. The storytelling, the craft, whatever the materials will be. Like one of the big things that's happened, that was a change, and it's been this way for a while. But is like the 3D side of concept art. Being able to work comfortably in ZBrush or like a Nomad Sculpt or Blender or Maya or whatever, the studio is using, being able to do that can, I think, make a big difference for a portfolio. I think it's always, to a certain degree, it's probably always been that way. They just use different things. They kit bash or use styrene or foam or whatever other materials to concept out things in a three-dimensional fashion. And paper craft or using cardboard and other things, I think has always been there. But I think, yeah, I was pointing out to my, some of my faculty, because I want to change one of our classes, that one that I'm actually teaching, I'd like it to be more traditional media based, the concept drawing class, and maybe bring back as a requirement like intensive perspective, and as part of that course. And if we can do that, I think it'll make a huge difference to students. And because I've often found that, like, learning technical perspective fixes a lot of drawing problems. It helps students see space better in a way that they may not have realized it before. And that can make, I think, a big difference for them. Yeah, I think, yeah, these, even though, like, a lot of, again, that type of work tends to be done 3D, right? So people build out rough 3D models and things like that. But I think, learning perspective, and the way I like to teach it too is I don't just teach it as linear perspective. I point out how the perspective is actually a way of expressing a lens, which I think is definitely relevant to students going into entertainment markets, or just in general. It kind of puts you in the view of it puts you in the eye of your audience. So when you're thinking about things in terms of a lens, the idea is you can be able to see how your audience is seeing things by being selective about that, and the different perspective types and your relationship to the perspective space and technical perspective makes all the difference in the world for that kind of thing. So I've often found. And that came out of the last school I was teaching at. I've taught technical perspective before, but I kind of realized that we can treat it like a lens by widening or narrowing the cone of vision. Yeah, and there's actually a way of drawing light with perspective too, right? So, yeah, but it's like, technical perspective. One of the things I teach on my teaching site over at myartprofessor.com. But it's I found it. Yeah, it just helps people really understand what's going on, because I think a lot of times we don't realize it, but we're kind of trained to see the world verbally. Which I think is where a lot of people get impressed with, like, AI stuff, is that they see the world in a verbal way rather than a visual way. They see it in a literary way almost, rather than actually seeing what's really going on. Which I think kind of gets in the way of understanding what's possible. But let's see if we drop that down or hold this back a little bit. Hello, Espanol. Sorry, no hablo español. Sadly. Other languages, yes, but not that one. That was too much. I speak well English. I'm pretty good at that, right? Born here, but Russian, Lithuanian, and some Cantonese. My Cantonese is probably the weakest of the three. Um, I've made time to study other ones when I've been in the countries, like when I've been in Spain. I made time to study some Spanish, but I don't remember really any of it now. But молодец. Uh, but I spent some time. Жил немножко в Литве прямо после упадания Советского Союза. И учился говорить там. Учился, конечно, в школе, немножко в университете, но не получилось особенно, потому что практика на уроке в классе на уроке не особенно полезна. То надо по-настоящему разговаривать и общаться с другими на месте. But I've got a bunch of books and reading, writing it. Это вообще не проблема. So I'm sad to learn that такие pirogi is no longer said by people. I didn't know that. It was said a long time ago, I guess, when I was learning, but nobody says those kind of pies anymore, which makes me sad. I like that better than that's life. It's more expressive. But, oh well. I do think, again, if there are just things, I think a lot of people try to conform when really what they should focus on is, general principles that they should all be well aware of, like, metaphorical stuff or narrative or perspective or that, and then kind of following their aesthetic interests. So looking at the work that they love and adopting things from it for themselves. Да, но умею писать и читать по-русски. Прочитал несколько книг, но немного по-русски. Немножко Толстоя и Гарри Поттера. Ну, это тяжелый язык, и особенно если человек американец, хоть бы говорит по-английски, это типично, что люди понимают. Поэтому больше людей общаются на английском. Потому что это международный язык. И поэтому так. All right, well, I think I'm going to stop there. It's been about an hour. That's usually I try to do for the warm-ups in the morning. So thanks to everybody that came in. Just getting this page all filled out. And hopefully be back first thing in the morning for me tomorrow. Пока.